Hello, everyone. I'm Keith the Stone, and I'm here as usual with Greg Naj and Sarah and Janet and Elen for HeroesX office hours for v15 of HeroesX. And the discussion questions that we'll be talking about today are the ones for hours 9 and 10, the first two Odyssey questions. So the hour 9 question here is in Greg's voice. When I was a PhD student at Harvard, so many years ago, Greg says, I once heard something most striking from my old teacher, John H. Finley, who was a stellar professor of ancient Greek literature. Odysseus, he said in one of his lectures, gets a good press only in the Odyssey. Well, he was certainly right in implying that Odysseus gets bad press in ancient Greek traditions situated outside our Odyssey. That is to say, Odysseus is an incorrigible trickster, as anthropologists would say it, and he tends to violate social norms. Perhaps he can violate even moral norms. I cannot disagree with such formulations, Greg continues, but my question here is heading in a different direction. Can we say that Odysseus gets bad press even in our Odyssey? What are folks saying about this?
Yes, participants are finding many places where Odysseus gets bad press in the Odyssey. So anyway, one of them mentions the episode with the Cyclops, with Polyphemus.
Yes.
Yeah. And how he provokes the Cyclops and then triggers the revenge of Poseidon.
Yes, yes, which is very troublesome. Very, very, very troublesome. I couldn't agree more. I think that's a lovely example. Lovely example.
Another poster drew our attention to Demodocus' performance, and when he was just going to tell about more what happened in Troy, Odysseus starts to cry, and that moment, that the absence of the story draws more attention to the story.
Yes, yes. It draws even more attention to at least one variant, which, if we trace the Odyssey tradition backward in time, would be very much on the minds of listeners. And that is how Odysseus behaved after Troy was finally set on fire, and the killing and the capturing proceeded, and then what he did in at least one version, where it is Odysseus who kills the child of Hector and Andromache. Yeah.
Someone else is focused on how, yes, he's very smart, he's very clever, we sort of admire that, but we're also a bit disconcerted by the fact that to do that, he so often has to lie. And, you know, that sort of escalates as we go through the Odyssey. And they're saying, well, it doesn't feel quite, it's rather different from how we might feel about Achilles, whom we also feel a bit ambivalent about. And so, you know, that the narratives about Odysseus reveal his tricks. Could we say that emphasizing mētis over BA is sort of bad press? And he makes a nice analogy. We love Shane, but we also love Brett Maverick. Do we sort of admire as well as feel disconcerted by it?
Yes. And you know, I think that maybe I should have asked my question not only about bad press in the Odyssey, but bad press in the Iliad. I really think that one of Odysseus's worst moments in the Iliad plus Odyssey combined is what he seems to be doing in Iliad 9, where as a member of a 3-member embassy to Achilles, he how shall I say it, cuts in line. And he's not supposed to be the first person who speaks, but he does. And in his reportage of the offer made by Agamemnon, he, may I put it this way, doctors what the offer is. Because what Agamemnon says, if Achilles accepts the offer, then the very acceptance of the offer proves that Agamemnon is superior to Achilles. So if Odysseus doesn't report that part, he is really about to sabotage the epic career of Achilles. So that's maybe the worst thing that he does in the Iliad plus Odyssey combined, you could argue. When it comes to lying, I need to say something that is not so much meant to excuse Odysseus, but just to make a differentiation between what we consider to be in our moral world, such as it is, lying, and what was considered to be lying back when. Here, I'm going to be an apologist for Odysseus to a degree. It's one thing to swear a false oath, but if you're saying something that is ambiguous, and the ambiguity fools those who are morally unqualified to understand what somebody is really saying, then it's not really the fault of the encoder of the ambiguous statement. And a lot of times, Odysseus can fool the morally defective listener, but those who are not morally defective can get it right. And my favorite example is what we moderns sometimes call the Cretan lies. And as you, dear colleagues, know, I have argued and argued and argued in many publications that actually those quote unquote lies would be legitimate variants in other ways of telling the Odyssey, ways that emphasize the traditions of the island of Crete. Sometimes we even say Cretan lies, as I noted. So there is such a thing as a Cretan Odyssey, or maybe several Cretan Odysseys. Therefore, when Odysseus narrates adventures of a Cretan prince, may I say a Minoan prince, it's not really a lie from the point of view of the ancient world. It's simply a complex coded message. How's that?
So is this maybe why we can feel a bit disconcerted by the way Odysseus presents himself or what he tells us, that we're not sure whether we are getting it or not? Is that maybe part of the, and would that be true of the ancient audience as well?
Yes, I think so. I think that you just have to be very alert when Odysseus speaks, because his discourse is so coded. Yes.
But if I understand right what you were saying, Greg, you would say that his discourse in the case of the embassy scene, where he and two others are trying to convince Achilles to rejoin the rest of the Greeks, that's not an incomplete or ambiguous message. That's just, well, it's an incomplete message. It's something more like deceit by omission.
Yes,
it's a really bad moment for Odysseus.
And after all, Odysseus is such a company man in the Iliad, And sometimes that seems to be condoned, as in Iliad 2. But then in other situations, as in Iliad 9, you ask yourself, is he carrying the trickiness too far? I love the anthropological approach of Paul Radin, or Radin, R-A-D-I-N. He's the author of a book called The Trickster, where in the appendix there is a charter myth of a Native American population, the Winnebago. And in that particular situation, the Winnebago trickster, whose persona is telling his own story, is committing maybe every social infraction that you can imagine in Winnebago society from A to Z, or A to Z. But then after the story is told, the same culture hero will tell the audience, or as I prefer to say, the listeners, okay, here is where this is wrong. And here is where that is wrong, all the way from A to Z. So a kind of retelling of the story where it's spelled out where infractions have happened, where violations of etiquette or morality have happened. And could we maybe end this discussion with another kind of action of Odysseus, which you can say gets bad press, but isn't so, shall we say, morally questionable? And that's where, this is my favorite example, in Odyssey 8, there he is, an unidentified guest. He has not yet been asked to identify himself, because the Phaeacians are also polite, or at least the king is also polite. And there he is at a feast that is arranged in his honor. And then he gets up and starts carving the meat. What is this person doing? He's the guest, not the host. It's like being a guest at a dinner and then getting up and carving the meat when it's the host who's supposed to be doing it. Out of turn, out of turn.
It's at that dinner where Odysseus's ambiguous stories are seen through, right, by the king and queen of the Phaeacians, because they're morally qualified. And it occurs to me that Achilles too, he can't fill in the thing that Odysseus left out in the embassy scene, but he doesn't get tricked or deceived by Odysseus in that scene.
He doesn't. And he says, hateful as the gates of Hades is somebody who says one thing and means another thing. It's Achilles who says it, so he gets it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not stupid. And of course, our friend Plato really picks up on that. So Plato can play games. If Achilles is so smart that he really gets it, then who's the bigger trickster? Is it really Odysseus, or is it Achilles who really gets it? But that's Plato.
Well, before we go so far afield as Plato, let's tear ourselves to another part of the Odysseus narrative.
Yes.
This is the hour 10 question. If you had to explain the relationship of Nostos and nóos by way of only one single story, as retold in the Homeric Odyssey, for example, the Lotus Eaters, the Sirens, or one of the others, which single story would you choose and why?
And this depends on the reader. And there is no favorite for me, because I change my mind from day to day about this. So let's see what our dear readers have to say.
Sound like Odysseus, dear Greg, changing your mind so often. But anyway, enough of the jokes. Sorry. Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah, well, one participant mentions the Phaeacian story, and then especially after leaving the palace of Alcinous, so he is brought back home. And then when Odysseus wakes up in Ithaca, he reacquire consciousness, nóos, and at the same time, he's back to his country, Nostos.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, that's a beautiful example. And it's one of the complex ones, isn't it? Yes.
So is it because he is mastering his mētis again?
I would think so. Yes, yes, yes. He's so intelligent. He just sparkles with intelligence.
A poster talked about Elpenor's story.
Yes.
And this is the question: is he an example of the perils of loss of soundness or orientation in your nóos?
Oh, yeah. I think of the fact that visual artists have really picked up on this. So there is a famous vase painting in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts where Odysseus sees Elpenor coming out of a swamp. It's very ghostly. So there are many variations on the theme of the dead sailor, and the dead sailor sending messages to Odysseus. How important it is to understand that he himself will be one day a dead sailor. So it's very ghostly and very mystical. That's a good one. Well, they're all good. So far, the two examples that you wonderful colleagues have channeled are great to think with.
And here's another example, which is a relatively short episode, and it's when Odysseus is asleep and the companions who don't have the Nostos to really trust him, I suppose, open the bag of winds that Aiolos gave him to safeguard.
Yeah.
And they get driven right back where they started. And they were jolly nearly home. They were within visual range. And so that recklessness of the companions, which is mentioned right at the very beginning, isn't it?
Yes, it's so frustrating. It reminds me of that game that not only children but adults can get very frustrated by, and that's snakes and ladders. And there are other ways of calling that game where you're almost at whatever it is, 0.99 or 100, and suddenly you slide down the ladder or the snake or whatever. And sometimes you get back to 0.0, which is what happens here. What can be more frustrating?
So again, it's sort of highlighting the difference between the companions, as we saw also with Elpenor, who was like the polar opposite. But then there's this point about Odysseus falling asleep, where he's asleep and therefore there's an absence of nóos because he's not awake and conscious, and he keeps falling asleep. Actually, I was just reminded of several other times where he's asleep and companions do something. So what's going on there, Greg?
It's experiencing mental disconnect, and even our intellectual hero can get mentally disconnected, and it happens, just as you say, dear Sarah, many times. It's like falling asleep on the job. Very frustrating. So many frustrations in that story, in the master narrative.
Mm-hmm. You really feel like you've been on a 10-year journey yourself.
Yes.
Trying to get back to Ithaca with Odysseus. So many troubles.
Are there other names for that board game that I call snakes and ladders? I guess ladders are for going up and snakes are for going down, but there are other terms like chutes and ladders, right? Chute as in something.
Yeah, that's why I've heard of it.
Yeah,
chutes and
ladders. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Always wonderful, dear friends. So we'll talk about hour 11 next time.
You know, I think of I think of how sometimes in a collegiate setting, this course which we're confronting, this program, sometimes called Heroes by college students, can also be called Heroes for Zeros. And I keep thinking, well, yeah, from hero to zero and back. Snakes and ladders, chutes and ladders.
That's Odysseus for you. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, see you all next time.